Okay, that's the first example. I'm not sure how well you can hear the decay. I know the aircon is quite pronounced, but hopefully you can follow the sound as it disappears, and you can kind of trace, the disappearance of the resonance as it fades. So that's example number one. This is example number two. Quite a different sounding recording, and quite a well-known field recording, I think. Okay, and this is our third example.
Okay, great. Oh, shit. Thank you.
Okay, so those are our three examples. The first one sounded a bit like this. The second one a bit like this. And the third one a bit like this.
Okay, great. Oh, shit. Thank you.
So I'll offer some of my own observations on kind of distinctions between these examples, because I think they exemplify they show us three ways we can make distinctions between how we record a space and the kind of perspective that different recording approaches will give a listener. So for the first example, white elephant, in the first example, the microphones we can hear are placed out in open space. They're at a good distance from specific sound events, so they capture lots of reverberant sound. And we get a clear representation of a sound's behavior in the environment. So we hear events, but we hear reverberant sound, which articulates the space that these events are happening in. And we get a sense of maybe what Pauline Oliveros might call the total content of the acoustic environment. High quality microphones and recording devices are useful for making this kind of recording because they capture the full frequency range well, and they also capture subtle variations in sound level. So those long decays that we hear, we can follow with our ear when captured well by good microphones. This first example we could call an ambient approach to recording, one that captures the impression of the whole environment, including the distal space, the furthest kind of horizon that we can listen to. The second example, the vultures eating a corpse, an animal's corpse, I should add. The Chris Watson recording, excuse me. So for this, the second example, the microphone, or microphones rather, are placed very close to particular sound events, and these become the subjects of the recording. And while these sound effects, like the vulture squawking, for example, are recorded loudly and clearly, we still hear something of the wider environment. So we get an impression of spatial context and depth. So the first example captures the full scene, if we want to say that. The second one is a more proximate recording of a particular event or activity or agent within that space that still gives us a sense of spatial context. The third example, the microphone is on the move, at least for a time, carried or worn by the recordist before being set down on a surface. This recording approach captures not only the shifting characteristics of a sonic environment, but also the activities of the recordist as they interact with it, traveling through space. Here the space can be heard as quiet or intimate in this case. We could call this third example a mobile approach, and an approach like this can be useful for tracing real-time interactions with a space by a recordist, for example, on a sound walk. And also may yield interesting information about how sound behavior changes through different parts of the space. So across a threshold, a doorway, for example, or between one area and another. Okay. So broadly speaking, three different approaches are demonstrated here: an ambient approach, a proximate approach, and a mobile approach to recording, each of which captures different spatial characteristics, interactions, and relations. Now I want to focus a bit more on microphones. This was covered a little bit earlier on, but I want to talk about some of the recording formats that we'll use and how they capture spatial information. So I'll start by talking about these ears and some of the other things that you see here. Thinking about how microphones capture space, maybe we can start by thinking about how hearing works. And we could start by acknowledging the obvious that most of us hear with two ears. We could say we listen binaurally, and that our oral perception of the location of things in space is connected to the way that our two ears receive sound and to what happens when we perceive left and right ear information simultaneously. So this real-time process of consolidating left and right ear acoustic information helps us to assess where sounds are coming from. So if a car passes me right to left, then the sound will reach this ear before it reaches this ear, and that relationship will gradually change. I can locate it to my right and traveling across the left-right plane to my left. Not only the volume will change, but also the aspects of the frequency will change, and also the kind of, so time and frequency will change. The shape of our ears, our pinna, our outer ears, our pinna, also affects our sense of where sounds are coming from, in particular whether they're coming from above or below our head. So our binaural process of hearing helps us to work out where things are located in space. As field recordists, it can be useful to think about a microphone as a kind of attendant ear that can capture the sound of a particular place at a particular time from a particular perspective. So we can think maybe about putting ears in different parts of a space. And thinking about that, microphones in this way also suggests why stereo recording and playback formats are so enduringly popular. We can record with a stereo microphone and mimic the binaurality of our hearing, and we can play it back on a stereo speaker system, again being able to mirror the left-right interplay that we experience when we listen to spatial sound. Okay, so stereo recording devices capture left and right acoustic information simultaneously, while stereo playback systems, mirror the binaurality of our hearing. So with that in mind, that we can think about a microphone as a, roughly speaking, crudely, maybe as an ear that we can place in different locations. I'll talk briefly about some different types of microphone or different spatial recording systems that we can use and that capture space in different ways. So firstly, I'll start with simple mono recording. We do this using one microphone which captures one audio file, a single channel audio file. As if we were recording with only one of our ears, we can still capture some motional and spatial information, how sounds die away, for example, depth of field, but we can't capture the left-right plane at all because we only have one ear, not two. Stereo recordings involve the use of two mics, which you can maybe see to the top of that recording device in the middle there, positioned in a XY pattern. And these capture a two-channel recording, as shown next to it. Here we can capture information in a left and right microphone simultaneously, allowing the representation of interplay across the left-right plane, and allowing us to open up a stereo image when we play it back on two speakers or stereo headphones. For binaural recording, which is represented at the bottom here, we also use two mics, and we also capture a two-channel recording. But binaural recording is where two microphones are arranged in such a way as to imitate the effect that a human head makes on the difference between left and right ear information. So often it involves putting two mics in the virtual or the kind of in the ears of a dummy head, like the one shown here, or we can indeed wear small microphones in our own ears. And by doing that, what we capture is not just a left and a right image, but the difference that having a head between those microphones makes on the overall impression of a space. So binaural recording uses 2 mics and generates a 2-channel recording, but it gives us a 360-degree impression of the recorded environment. 2 more to cover, and these are kind of basic systems. We could go further. With what's known as mid-side recording, we also use 2 mics, and we also capture a 2-channel recording. But instead of the 2 channels capturing a left and a right representation, with mid-side we have one channel capturing the center and the other channel capturing the sides. And we do this by using, I won't go into this in too much detail, but as we can see here, we've got 2 mics, one capturing the middle and one positioned off axis, kind of pointing that way. And what we can do with that second recorded signal is, in basic terms, copy the audio file, reverse the phase on it, and generate a left-right image using one recording. But I suppose all we need to understand is that a mid-side configuration can capture the center and the sides using only 2 channels, and that by using a decoder, a software plugin, or a mixer, we can allow control over the relationship between the middle channel and the outer channels at the stage of mixing. So we can kind of open and close the width of the recorded field. The 5th and last configuration that I'll talk about is ambisonic recording. The 3D recorders that we've been talking about earlier on are ambisonic, or are capable of ambisonic recording, and that's what allows us to capture a 360 acoustic environment, which we can kind of reposition and play around with in the studio in various ways. And in basic terms, ambisonics is a way of creating or recreating a fully 3-dimensional sound image based on the concept that all spatial information about a sound can be captured using 3 figure-of-8 microphones, one placed in the left-right plane, one placed in the front-back plane, and one placed in the up-down plane. This gives us 3 signals labeled X, Y, and Z. And in order for the system to work, we also need an overall reference level, which is provided by a 4th mono omnidirectional microphone placed in the space. This one is labeled W. So we can, using 4 mics, we can capture a full 3D sound field, producing 4 signals, and we call this B-format ambisonics. And with this, we get an impression of each axis, if we want to put it that way, of the sound field. Now, we've only got a week here, so I don't expect to develop an advanced understanding of how these different technologies work, but knowing a bit about how each of these recording formats listens to spaces will help us make informed decisions about what microphones and devices we want to use in the field and what kind of spatial representation they'll help us generate. In short, different recording equipment helps us to capture spaces from different perspectives and convey different aspects to audiences. This is a short list of the equipment that I think we have available to us. We've got some of those Zoom VR ambisonic recorders. We've got various stereo recorders, some other stuff. And we've also got our phones, which are kind of not very high spec, but when we're recording, well, they have a practical use in the sense that they're very small and we can carry them around with us wherever we go. They're also not very delicate. So there are some things that they may be well suited for. There are other things that they will not be well suited for. But let's not discount the humble phone. These are all tools at our disposal for recording environments and music performances this week. Okay, so turning our attention to the Dionysus Theatre, where we're going to go later on, I suppose it's maybe useful to just ask ourselves now or later what kind of sonic characteristics and relationships we're interested in capturing. And some of these things have come up already in discussions. So the kind of natural environment and the wildlife and the insect life around the theatre, the dimensions of it, the materiality of it, things like this. So before we record, it might be, or maybe even as we're recording, it might be useful to ask ourselves what aspects of these spaces we want to explore. And perhaps at that point we can bring back in our three different approaches. So we might capture ambient recordings, which might give us an audio representation of the wider spatial context around the theatre, the totality of a music performance, the weather, the wildlife. And with the ambient recording, that allows us to, again, think of the total space as the subject of the recording. With a proximate recording approach at the theatre, maybe we can engage with different types of sonic detail, small sounds, the personal intimacy of performing, perhaps, maybe musical parts within the whole. Maybe we can trace change over time from a fixed location. And with the proximate approach, we can think about specific activities or events or agents as the subjects of those recordings. Not the complete picture, but the event within the complete picture. And again, with a mobile recording approach, we can place our focus in a different place. We can capture things like transitions, thresholds, and partitions in the theatre. We can capture aspects of the embodied experience of a recordist as they move. We can capture the aspects of the embeddedness of listening. And with a mobile approach, the moving perspective, this shifting spatial context, we can think of as the subject of the recordings. So we can use one or all of these approaches and later use studio technologies to combine them or cut between them, making soundscape compositions that play between a range of different perspectives. Okay. So I'll close just by presenting, this short practical checklist, which I've kind of stolen from Michael Gallagher, a well-known sound geographer. It's quite a useful checklist. There are some more things on Michael's list, but I've boiled it down to things that I think are relevant here. But these are just considerations that we can take before we make recordings. So firstly, consider why you want to make the recordings in the first place. What are the relationships of interest? Who is the audience for these recordings? What is the playback format? What are you going to do with them? And how are you going to present them? So that's the first thing. The second thing is listen in the space. Sounds very obvious, but sometimes when we get our hands on technology, the focus can become using the technology rather than listening to where the kind of points of interest in the space are and then moving to them to capture them. So I would recommend spending some time forgetting about the technology and listening to the space, exploring it. Thirdly, as we move through the week, familiarize yourself and experiment with different recording equipment, make test recordings, listen back to them, and get a sense of the character of the device. By doing this a little bit, we can quickly learn about the kind of properties and artifacts that different models of recorder will capture. 4, these are obvious things, but worth putting all in one place. Set recording levels with care. If our recordings peak above 0, they become pretty much useless from a compositional standpoint because they will introduce digital clipping. So set recording levels ideally peaking around -12, -10 dB, and that will show you how to do that, but it's pretty easy using the different additioning capabilities of the devices. So set recording levels well. Record in a high quality format if you can, so minimum 24 bits WAV or AIF, sample rate 44.1 kilohertz. Again, most recorders will be set to something like this, but it's good to check just to make sure we're capturing something useful. 6, monitor whilst recording, so that would mean listening on headphones to the recordings you're making as you're making them, or don't. This is, I think, a kind of personal choice. Some people like to listen back via headphones while they're scanning around with their microphone. Some people like to have the microphone accompanying their listening to the environment. So maybe try both and see what feels right. I never monitor on headphones, but some people think that's madness. So whichever you prefer. 7, leave the levels alone whilst recording. If you notice that your levels are far too high or far too low, your choice is either to risk it and leave things running or to stop the recording and start again. If you start messing with the levels during recording, then when you come to work with the recordings in the studio, things become a little bit unstable, let's say, in terms of managing volume balance. 8, nearly there. Try and record, if you find yourself in a place of interest, try and record for at least 3 minutes. Ideally, at least 5 minutes. Usually, if we find somewhere that sounds interesting, then we might capture interesting things that happen over a short period of time, but we want to leave time to capture longer transitions. So 3 to 5 minutes is a good benchmark, I think. Think about wind protection. So a lot of the time when you see pictures of people field recording, you'll see a big furry cat around the mic. That is to mitigate wind. And I don't know how windy these spaces are, but it might be that we have those options available to us and we can use windshields, or it might be that you just need to move somewhere a bit more accommodating if you don't want loads of wind in your recordings. Lastly, turn off your mobile phone when you're recording, not on silent, completely off, because if you don't, the likelihood is you'll get that kind of interference noise that we've heard today through the kind of amplification system here. Flight mode, in my experience, will not cut it, no matter what people might tell you. Turn your phone off unless you're using it to record, and that will mean there's no electromagnetic interference in the recording that you make. Okay, so that's a bit of a fly-through. We've covered some approaches: ambient, proximate, mobile. We've talked a little bit about how microphones work and how they capture spatial information relating to the way that we hear. And I've given you some kind of starting practical tips in terms of how you can prepare yourself to make field recordings that are useful and interesting and that you can apply in a soundscape composition, which we'll do later in the week. That is it from me. I believe it's nearly lunchtime. Here are some references. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Iain, for this very detailed exploration of the recording techniques. So you must, first of all, at the theater, be very close to Iain, to Areti, and to Jose Luis, of course, that they will guide you how to record with your mobiles or with the Zoom recorders that we will give you in the entrance. So for now, all the lectures will be uploaded at the drive. We have also a video of all the lectures. Now we can go all together to eat to the restaurant. We told you Likavitu 14. It's only, I think, 5 minutes from here on feet. And after that, you can go take the metro to go to the Acropolis station. There are a lot of cafes around. You can sit a little bit, have a cafe. And around 5 o'clock, you're going to wait us in front of the Dionysus Theater. I have the free entrance. I will be there. And after we start the exploration of the archaeological site, you must be, I told you, in teams with Ian Areti and Jose Luis, who will tell you how to use the recorders and what are you going to do if you don't have recorders, your mobile phones, and if you find any detail to record it inside, etc. Okay? And Luis, our friend, will be our guide to the theater. Yes. And after we will decide around 6:30 to make the performance. First of all, we will go up, etc. Okay? So the groups we have already here. I would like to tell you we have the teams. What's the final aim? The final aim is that we are going to collect all this data. And on Thursday, we have some other lectures at the laboratory. You bring your laptops. And there is, in every team, one leader who is in music technology. And this is the team from Glasgow. So you go to every team, and you start from today to discuss the content of your creative approach, because you're going to create two kinds of soundscapes. The one is more real, and the other is going to be creative with poetry and digital storytelling and things like that. So you're going to decide in which way you're going to work with the philologists, the archaeomusicologists, the linguists. Are you going to use ancient Greek pronunciation, or ancient Greek instruments from sables, or reverb techniques for the theater, and many things like that? It's up to you to start to discuss about that in teams. So you must get organized slowly, self-organized. So see you later. You finish around 4:30 to eat, and after you can have a cafe near Acropolis. You get the metro to the Acropolis. There are a lot of cafes there. And after you come to the theater, okay?